Welcome to the History Nerds United podcast. I am your head nerd, Brendan. Thank you so much for being here today. Big episode, folks. Lynne Olson and her new book, Empress of the Nile. If you've never heard of Lynne before, she's a big deal. She's the queen of World War II literature, in my estimation, and a lot of other people's estimation. Her books are fantastic. They're detailed, but they never feel long because she just knows how to write these things. This is actually Empress of the Nile, branches out a little bit from World War II. We talk about Lynne kind of expanding her horizons as far as these books are concerned. She's amazing. She's so nice. She was so great to talk to. So why don't I shut up and let's go talk to Lynne Olson. All right, here we are with Lynne Olson, her new book, Empress of the Nile, the daredevil archaeologist who saved Egypt's ancient temples from destruction. Lynne, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I need to ask you first, Lynne, what's it like having a Secretary of State call you our era's foremost chronicler of World War II politics and diplomacy?
Well, any Secretary of State writing that about you would make you happy. Would make you thrilled. Certainly made me thrilled, but the fact that it came from Madeleine Albright was a particular honor for me because she's really one of my heroes. I have admired her ever since she got into public life. You know, I regard her as a role model in terms of a woman activist. And so for her to have written that about my writing really has meant the world to me.
You were a reporter for years, too, so you've been, around the D.C. area and stuff like that. Was that the pinnacle, or was there anyone else who kind of maybe even told you just one-on-one, like, I love your books, and you just kind of got weak-kneed about it?
Well, a number of people actually are fans of my books. Two of them are Bill and Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton wrote about a book that I wrote called Citizens of London. It was a New York Times column. She was asked which books were on her book stand, and one of them was Citizens of London, and she explained why she liked it. But no, I mean, Madeleine Albright's praise meant more to me than any others that I have gotten to be. Quite frankly, I'm not sure that I live up to that description, but for her to even think that, really, really meant a lot.
Congrats on being humble, but she's right. You're a big deal. As we talked about, I've read multiple of your books, and one thing I really like is, your books are deep. Like, these are not short books. These are in-depth books, but I always find they read as if they're 200 pages of very light material. I'm sure you've heard that before.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I really work hard at doing that. I really work hard at trying to tell a story, not just write about a historical era or historical event, but really focus on people and telling the story of that event or era or whatever I'm writing about. That's really, it's basic to me. I will not write a book about a topic that does not have interesting, compelling characters. I didn't set out to do this, but I found that the people I write about are, for the most part, unsung heroes. They do something, they accomplish something, most of them in World War II, that really changed their country, the world, but they never really gotten that much credit for it. So I didn't set out to do that, as I said. But I think I subconsciously, now I guess consciously, look for people who set out to do something important and meaningful.
Well, speaking of the most recent person that you chose, I'm going to go ahead and just call her a badass. We're just going to start from there.
Oh, good. She is a badass.
It's very funny, as we talk about this book, there's huge sections of her life that can kind of be broken off, like she's doing this here, then this happens and this. And then you put them all together and you're like, damn, this was one woman who, as you talked about, I had never heard this name before. So I'm going to say her name one time, and then you can correct me, and then I'll probably still continue to butcher it. But Christiane de Roche-Noblcourt.
Perfect. Okay. Absolutely perfect.
Ooh,
yes.
We'll see if I can keep that one up. It's very easy to call her a female Indiana Jones back in the day. How did you come across Christiane?
I wasn't looking for her when I came across her. I was looking for a topic for my next book after I had written my previous book called Madame Foucault's Secret War, which is about the only woman who headed a major resistance organization in occupied France during World War II. I had obviously concentrated on the French resistance in that book and had written in other books about the French resistance. I started looking around, okay, maybe there's another topic relating to the French resistance. And I started doing research on the first organized resistance network in France, actually in Paris, which was a fascinating organization. It was called the Museum of Man Network. It was connected to the Museum of Man in Paris, which is the Anthropological Museum of France. And what made this network really interesting, among others, is that they were almost all intellectuals who initially belonged to this organization. I mean, they were museum officials, they were anthropologists, archaeologists, writers, intellectuals of all stripes. So that really interested me. And the other thing that interested me was that women played a huge role in creating this network, which was unusual. I mean, it was, as I said, it was the first organized network in France. Women were given rein to play major roles in it. That changed dramatically as the resistance got stronger and it grew. It became very male-oriented, very male-dominated, and women were really in subordinate roles after that. But this particular network, that wasn't true. So I started doing a lot of research, and I started reading about the various people who were involved in it. And I came across this one young woman who was 27 years old. She worked at the Louvre. She was a curator at the Louvre, and her name was Christiane de Roche-Noble-Court. So she was a part of this network right from the beginning. But the more I learned about her, the more I thought that really wasn't the major thing she did in her life. As I found out, all the things you just talked about, what she was involved in, it was an extraordinary story. And like you, I had never, ever heard of her. And that's one of the things when I'm looking for, characters, I like to run across people that I've never heard of because I get to tell their story. And I couldn't believe that no book had been written about her. I mean, this woman, when she died, was one of the top archaeologists in the world, let alone France. But nothing had been written about her. Even in French, there were documentaries about her, but nothing had been written about her in French or in English. So I thought, oh my God, this is what I want to do. I want to do it on her, and concentrate more on, her later life. I do talk about her during the resistance. I talk about her standing up to the Gestapo, being the badass woman she was. But the main focus of the book is her work post-war.
Stepping back for a little bit, before we even jump into her life, I just want to focus on the fact that, you write books about World War II, like that's your sweet spot. Not to pigeonhole you in that, but was it exciting to have, hey, you have this entry into her life from World War II, you are an expert, regardless of what you might try and say. You're an expert, but this really expands to a different part of history that you're not constantly writing about. Was that exciting, or was it a little nerve-wracking?
That's a really good question because, I think I was being lazy by going back to the war again. And thinking, okay, I'll pick on something else that I haven't written about the war. And I wasn't really getting excited. I mean, I considered a lot of different ideas that were related to World War II, and none of them really excited me. And I thought, oh God, this is really going to be a slog. And then when I thought, okay, I'm going to write about her, I'm going to write about archaeology, I'm going to write about ancient Egypt, none of which I knew anything about. It was exciting. You're absolutely right. It really turned me on. I mean, I got really involved and enthralled in all this, something that I really didn't know. And it was kind of a kick in the pants saying, you really need to get out of the rut and, find something new. And as much as I've enjoyed writing the books about World War II, and I particularly enjoyed the book I wrote about Marie-Madeleine Foucault, Madame Foucault's Secret War, that was really fun. This was really fun too. Even though it was something that the subject matter that I really was unfamiliar with, I had this extraordinary character in the middle of all of it. So that made it really easy in a sense to do. It wasn't easy in terms of writing about archaeology or ancient Egypt. I had to learn all that, but with her in the middle of it, it really, that really propelled me along.
So how does she get to become an archaeologist, right? What is her early life like? Because obviously a woman becoming an archaeologist back at these times was super easy, right? There was a path laid out for her, and all she had to do was walk it, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly. It was so easy. She was born in the early 20th century. She became interested in archaeology actually through the obelisk of Luxor. Those who've been to Paris know exactly what I'm talking about. It's the big obelisk that's in the middle of the Place de la Concorde. It looks like the Washington Monument. And it is really from Egypt. The Washington Monument is not from Egypt. And she was taken there by her grandfather. She grew up in Paris. And her grandfather would take her, she was on his shoulders when she was like 3 or 4, and took her to see the obelisk. And she was enthralled with it, not because of how giant it was, but because of the hieroglyphs that were on the obelisk. She was just taken with it. She wanted to know more about it. So that's what really first got her interested in ancient Egypt. And then in 1922, she was 9 years old. King Tut's tomb was discovered, which was the story of the year, if not the decade, if not the century. I mean, it was a huge, huge news story, and it remained so for years. And she, again, was just enthralled by the story. I mean, she would devour at the age of 9 any story that was in the French press about the discovery of King Tut's tomb. And it was the beginning of the illustrated magazine. So there were a lot of photos that were taken at the time. And that really got her hooked on ancient Egypt. So from the time she was little, she really was fascinated by it. She never thought initially, that she was ever going to become an Egyptologist. I don't think she even knew what an Egyptologist was, but she was really, really fixated on that. And her parents, to their credit, did not try to discourage that. I mean, she came from an upper middle class family. Her father was a lawyer. Her mother was a housewife, but her mother had gone to college. She had graduated from college, which was very unusual in France at that time. And they encouraged their daughter, who was this outgoing, bright, energetic young girl, to do whatever she wanted. Again, very unusual for that time period, and also for her place in society, where girls were taught to be, their role in life was to be a wife and mother. But her parents never did that with Christiane. So she grew up thinking she could do whatever she wanted to. She had an older brother, and her older brother and his friends accepted her into their circle. So, she never had the idea that, okay, I'm a girl. That means I can't do a lot of things, that my life is going to be constricted. So she grew up thinking that she could, do what she wanted. And when she graduated from the French version of high school, she was interested in finding out more about ancient Egypt. And that's really how this all began. She went to the École du Louvre, the art school connected to the Louvre Museum in Paris, and started taking Egyptology classes.
That seemed to be like kind of her two traits that set up the rest of her life, is that she's not going to hear no, and she'll outwork everyone if that's what's necessary.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that's really a good perception. I think that's absolutely true. She, right from the beginning, refused, as you said, to accept the word of anybody. I mean, if she thought she could do something, she did it. And she refused to back down, which caused her a lot of grief, because there were no women archaeologists, especially in France back then. I mean, there had been a few, particularly in Britain, but women and archaeologists didn't go together. I mean, they certainly were not encouraged even in Britain. But in France, it was anathema. The idea that a woman was going to be an archaeologist. Now, we're talking about the 1930s, when she started going to school in archaeology. It was a boys' club. It was a tightly closed boys' club, especially in France. And women need not apply. But she just refused to accept that. She ran into a lot of harassment, a lot of misogyny right from the beginning, from the time that she was in the École du Louvre. She also took classes in various other institutes of higher education. The men just tried to freeze her out, but she refused to be frozen out.
And it seemed like she did luck out that there were men at very important parts in her life that looked at what she was doing and realized that she had these special abilities, skills, whatever you want to call them, and kind of gave her the shot. And then she always just seemed to nail it whenever she was given that, right?
Again, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think all her life, she had trouble with men who were basically at the same level she was. In other words, they were students when she was a student, or they were, young, hungry archaeologists looking for that first job when she was doing the same. I think men of her age on her level saw her rightly as a threat. I mean, she was brilliant. She was absolutely brilliant. But she had these older men who served as her mentors right from the beginning, men who saw her brilliance, who saw her incredible energy and incredible devotion to hard work, and gave her opportunities. And she could never have done what she did without those mentors. And she had a number of them. And she was very fortunate in that. It's very interesting that there were a number of people like that who were very big in their field who opened the door for Christiane. But she took advantage. She got through that door, and she proved herself time and time again.
And I think it's one thing for somebody to be very good at what they do, very smart and everything like that. But what really made me just say how special a person this is when you first start talking about what she's like out in the field. The jewel in the crown was that you did field work.
Right.
And there was a few different ways you could do field work. If you were a bit of a dandy, you could, have this tent and do this and all of this. What was she like out in the field when she was digging in the dirt and all of those things?
She got the chance to go to Egypt shortly after she finished school and was working in a kind of a very junior position at the Louvre. She got a chance to go to Egypt as an observer, really, to this incredible expedition in a place called Deir el-Medina, which is in the Valley of the Kings. The Valley of the Kings is where most of the early pharaohs were buried. This place, the Deir el-Medina, was the ruins of a town. It wasn't a royal town. It was a town where the workers of the men who decorated, who painted, who dug the tombs for the pharaohs. This is where they lived. So this is really not about the pharaohs. This is about ordinary life in ancient Egypt. So, I mean, it was an incredible opportunity for her. And she really proved herself, even though she wasn't really involved in the dig in terms of actually doing work on the dig. But she impressed the two archaeologists who were in charge of it and who are world-renowned figures in archaeology to this day, which helped her move on. The dig that she was involved in, it was her first real dig, came a couple of years later. And it was a difficult place. I mean, it was a really hard place to be. It's hard to explain. It was what's called a tell, Tell, which means, it was a huge mound. I mean, I'm talking like hundreds of feet tall. And it was like a layer cake. It was layers of ancient Egypt history. And at the bottom were the pharaohs, and then as you went up, you ran into the Persians and the, other peoples who had invaded Egypt and the Romans, etc. So it was gigantic. And it was really difficult because it was a very dirty place. I mean, you were involved in the dig she was involved in. Dust constantly was billowing around, and when you finish your day, you look like a zombie. She started in the morning before 5:30, and she went until like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and she was overseeing workers at the dig. And she was in a canvas tent. No running water, no sophisticated sanitary conditions. It was hard. It was really hard, but she loved it. She found herself there, and she found that she was really good at it. She also found she really enjoyed not only ancient Egypt, but she enjoyed modern Egypt. I mean, she learned Arabic. which is very unusual and still is very unusual for Western archaeologists in Egypt. Very, very few speak fluent Arabic. She ended up speaking fluent Arabic. She really cared about the workers. So everything about it was, wonderful for her. She knew that this is really where she belonged.
And her learning Arabic, being, one of the people and really caring about the workers, is kind of huge for her entire career, right? Because she becomes known as one of the Westerners who is going to take care of people, is not going to take advantage of people, which, shoot, we can barely even say that nowadays. So not only is it very unusual for that time that she's a woman doing this, that she's showing care for the people that are working with her, it ends up being kind of a huge deal down the line too, right?
Yeah. She impressed the Egyptians right from the beginning. But one of the reasons I think it's really interesting is that I think one thing that propelled her to do that is that she was a woman. So she knew what it was like to be an outsider. She knew what it was like to be harassed and not taken seriously, which is the way they acted towards the Egyptian workers. They were very arrogant. They didn't regard them as colleagues. Obviously, they looked down on them, and she felt somewhat the same way. So I think she felt she had a lot in common with the Egyptian workers. She also just loved the Egyptians, period. She loved their humor, their hospitality. She loved everything about Egypt. And, I don't know that you could say that about many of the men she worked with at the time. So she was very, very different in the way she regarded the country and the people, and it really helped her later on.
And now this is going to seem kind of strange because it's really just a stop off in this amazing career. But then, World War II comes around,
right,
and she is French. And as we all know, France didn't have a great experience during World War II. Where does she end up, and what are her activities in World War II?
World War II was an interesting interlude for Christiane. The first thing she did, actually, even before the war broke out, as I said, she was with the Louvre. She had been working with the Louvre for a couple of years. The Louvre, before the war, basically evacuated all its major treasures outside. I mean, they took them out of the Louvre and they hid them in chateaus in central France, in the Loire Valley for the most part. And so she helped pack up the Egyptian galleries. And then later in the war, when the Germans had invaded France and were on their way marching through France, and they're heading toward the Loire Valley, she was designated by the head of the Louvre to go and get those Egyptian artifacts that were at this one chateau in the Loire Valley and accompany them to another chateau near the Spanish border. So it's southwestern France, to get them away from the Germans. And so she did this. She made 3 round trips between this chateau in the Loire Valley to the chateau in the southeast part of France, about 500 miles each way, with trucks, and collecting these treasures and taking them. So, she was only in, what was she then, 27, 26. But she managed to do that, and she managed to get them. And, the Germans are marching in. There are refugees everywhere. It's impossible. The German planes are bombing the refugees and bombing her trucks. But she manages to get them to the southwest, and then comes back to Paris, goes back to her work at the Louvre, but also joins a resistance organization. So she's working at the Louvre during the day, and at night and on weekends, she is, she's in the resistance. She's hiding escaped British and French soldiers. She's helping to put out a newspaper, an underground newspaper. And she's also involved as a courier, taking intelligence from occupied France, which included Paris, down to unoccupied France in the south, so that this intelligence could be sent to London. And she was doing that one day when she was captured. She was taken into custody by the Gestapo, and who accused her, quite rightly, of being a spy. She denied it. She said she was a curator from the Louvre. She had a German pass, an Ausweis, that she could go back and forth between occupied France and unoccupied France, but they insisted she was a spy. So she went through this interrogation in the town of Moulins. She had been on a train coming from Paris, and they stopped the train in Milan, and they took her off. And so she was brought into a room with a bunch of SS guys who were smoking cigars and had their feet on the table. And they started their interrogation. Well, again, we've talked about this. She refused to be harassed by anybody, and that included the Gestapo. So she wouldn't answer their questions. I mean, they asked her if she spoke German in French. One of them asked in French if she spoke German, and she said no, she did. But she said, I refused to, cooperate with them from the very beginning. And so they kept asking her questions, and she got angrier and angrier at their arrogance. And then so finally she just burst out and said, "You all are so rude. I can't believe you were raised this way. How do you dare greet a woman with your feet on the table?" And they were stunned. They didn't know what to say. But they went back to, interrogating her, and she said she started cursing at them. And they finally just gave up and sent her back to her cell. And the next day they let her go. I mean, it wasn't because she stood up to them that they let her go. I mean, I think probably she was cleared in Paris. But that whole encounter just sums up Christiane. She wasn't she was afraid. She was afraid. But she wasn't going to allow men to treat her like that.
I'm just going to believe that as soon as she left the room, somebody said, "Fräulein is crazy. We should send her back to Paris. We don't need this." Well, I mean, I don't want to yada, yada, yada World War II, but she has too much life left. We got to keep moving. So this is probably the most eye-opening part of the book for me. World War II ends, and this is kind of the status of all of these Egyptian treasures, right, that today everybody knows, pyramids, all this stuff. But after World War II, it really seems like there's only two ways Egyptian treasures are looked at. Let's steal them, mainly talking about England and France, let's just be honest, or no one cares. I mean, there was just these complete dichotomy of people trying to take them who were not Egyptian, and then the Egyptians who were kind of like, well, that's about to get buried under some water, and it's going to drown. Oh, I guess we don't have that anymore. Was that something new to you, that just the way they were being treated at this time?
I think the Egyptians had so much on their plate at that point. After the war, Egypt had really been controlled by the West for a very, very long time. In fact, what's so fascinating to me is in 1952 is when Gamal Abdul Nasser, a colonel in the Egyptian army, and a crew of colonels basically overthrew the king of Egypt, who was basically in the pocket of Britain. Nasser became the head of the Egyptian government. This is 1952. It was the first time in over 2,000 years that an Egyptian had actually been the real head of the government. Before, yes, there was a king, but he was controlled by France and England, principally by England. So, foreign countries had basically ruled Egypt since the Romans defeated Cleopatra in 30 AD. The Egyptians had never been in charge until Nasser. So, I think they weren't really focused on the antiquities that much. And you're right, the Western archaeologists were focused on that, but only insofar as they could come in and take those antiquities out and put them in their own museums.
Now, just rewinding for a second, you mentioned Gamal Nasser. When you're a historian, he can be, depending on who you talk to, seen one way or the other, and they go to two very huge extremes. So when you're a historian writing about somebody else, right, you can't get completely into this person's life and all these perceptions of him. How do you as a historian write about that person, but still feel like you're giving the full story?
That's a good question. It's a very interesting question, because you're right. Nasser is looked at, when he took control of Egypt, he was demonized in the West and, worshipped in the Middle East, by Arab countries. He was demonized in the West because, quite frankly, Egypt had been controlled by the West up to that point. When he and his colonels took control, they were taking control back from basically England and France. And England and France really never got over it. You're talking 1952, that was only 6-7 years after the end of World War II. Both of those countries were fast losing their colonies. They were not the strong imperialist powers that they had been, especially for England. The idea that Egypt would be under the control of Nasser or, natives of Egypt was untenable. We have to remember that Egypt meant the Suez Canal, and the Suez Canal was really, really important for both England and France, particularly England. So the idea that Arabs could take over the canal, which is what Nasser did eventually, was just unfathomable. And so they, meaning the government of England and the government of France, just basically wanted Nasser out. Israel felt the same way. So you had these countries who were directly involved. And then you had the United States, which, he was a nationalist. He wasn't a communist. He did not want any other country to tell him what to do. The U.S. saw him as a communist because he wasn't, supporting the Western powers anymore. So he was caught in the middle. I think that if the West had treated him differently, I not only think, I know that if the West had treated him differently, had regarded him with sensitivity, I think he could have come to, a détente with these countries, but they refused to do that. I view him a lot more sympathetically than I think I would have before, because I think he was trying. He very much wanted to get along, certainly with the United States. He was very pro-American. I mean, he spoke fluent English. He watched American movies. He really, really wanted to work with the United States. And under the Eisenhower administration, that was just impossible.
So it sounds like when you're writing about somebody who could be pretty controversial, you kind of focus your lens on them through the way the book is going, right? Like,
yes,
not getting into too much and just saying, this is where their actions kind of figure into the narrative and kind of keep focused on that.
That's right. I mean, I think that there are a lot of things that were bad about Nasser. I mean, he became an authoritarian. But at this particular point, we're talking about 1952 through basically the early 60s. I think he was trying. I think that, as I said, there was a point where I think the U.S. and Britain and France could have come to an agreement with him, but it just wasn't going to work. The thing about my book is that he did, in fact, after all these difficulties, Suez, etc., he did come to an agreement with the West in terms of saving these antiquities that Christian was involved in. But yes, no, I really focus on him just for that period.
So speaking of this period, I'm just going to say, all right, there's about to be a dam built. That's going to cause a problem for our heroine here. So what happened and how does Christian factor into this?
Okay, so Nasser, after he becomes the leader in Egypt, decides that he is going to build a huge dam. There's already a dam called the Aswan Dam, which basically regulated the Nile River. The Nile River is the most important element in Egypt. One has to understand how important the Nile is before one can understand Egypt. It was, a life giver. It flooded every year, and then the flood would recede, and so there would be this narrow little band on either side of the Nile, which was very fertile, and that was what kept Egypt alive. So they really relied on the Nile. But the Nile sometimes didn't cooperate. Sometimes there were massive flooding on the Nile. Sometimes the Nile didn't flood that much, so the land was dry. So the original dam was meant to correct all that, to regulate the Nile. So when Nasser took over power, he decided he needed a much bigger dam because the population of Egypt was growing so fast in terms of agriculture and electricity. But in making this dam, it would flood dozens of antiquities, including some of the most ancient temples in Egypt. We're talking now here about the late 50s when he came up with this project. By this time, Christian was working in Egypt, was one of the very few Westerners still allowed to work in Egypt. She was overseeing the creation of a new archaeological center in Egypt. And she saw what was going to happen. She saw that these temples, some of which are, among the most beautiful temples in Egypt, were going to be destroyed because if this dam was built and nothing happened, they were going to be drowned in the floodwaters. And so she decided that she was going to try to do something about it.
Now, quick pause on this, going back to you being an author. I have to say you did a wonderful job in this because you made it so that my mind could understand it. But the engineering required to move these antiquities, it's pretty freaking complicated. How much did you have to read about engineering to be able to say, all right, how do I make this even understandable in this book?
That's a good question. I mean, not much. I mean, I did read a lot, but I was fortunate in particular, these two temples called Abu Simbel. Those were the most important of the temples. They were cut into a rock, into a cliff. They were huge. It was a huge, monstrous temples. No book recently has been written about it, but at the time, there were a lot of stories, particularly, thank God, by National Geographic. I can't remember how many. And then they turned it into a book that explained it, in fairly simple language. It was an incredible process trying to figure out how in the hell you take these enormous edifices that are cut in the rock. They're not freestanding. How you save all that and then move it up to a higher place so that it won't be drowned. Nobody could agree on how you did it for years. And finally, in the nick of time, they came up with a solution that they thought was going to be a disaster, which was to cut these temples and these huge statues into pieces and move them. And everybody would say, oh God, it's not possible. It's just not possible. But in fact, they ended up doing it.
And it wasn't even just pick it up and put it over there. It's like, hold on, we have to still put it somewhere around here because it's set up so that the sun comes through at this particular time. Like it was literally one of those situations where it's like, how complicated can we make this problem? Okay, that's the problem. And then even when they started doing it, they're like, might work, might not. We're about to find out. There's no other choice.
Yeah, this is when they had decided that, okay, maybe we're going to even try it. Even before, she was leading the charge, but nobody else was. I mean, she was saying this needed to be done. And everybody's saying, A, it's impossible, can't do it. And B, there's so much tension in the world. The Cold War is heating up. We're talking now late 50s, early 1960s. It's heating up. Nobody's going to cooperate. Countries that are each other's throats. The Soviet Union is threatening. The U.S. refuses to go along. France, England. Everybody thought it was a nightmare. There's just no way. And she kept saying, "You got to do it. You got to do it. You got to do it." And she finally got enough support that she was able to start the ball rolling. But if it hadn't been for her, it would never have happened.
And you dig into how much money it was going to cost, and they had to get it from different places. I love that Egypt had to sweeten the deal sometimes and say, okay, if you help us save this, we'll give you a miniature one of your own.
That's right.
So, if you walk into a museum, everybody, and you see something from ancient Egypt, there's a good chance it was kind of a barter system if it wasn't stolen.
Right, exactly. No, that's absolutely right. So Egypt did go along with it. Egypt provided a huge amount of money to do it, but they needed, a huge amount more. And Nasser obviously agreed to all this. And he said, okay, yes, the top 5 countries or top 4 countries will get a temple of their own. And that's exactly what happened.
So back to Christiane, she is instrumental in saving all of these antiquities. And of course, then she decides, hey, I've done enough and I'm going to retire and stop going out to the field, right? Or did that end differently? I forget.
No, then she started the whole international craze for King Tut. One of the things that Nasser did, besides give out these temples, is that in thanks to her and to France for what they did to save the temples, Nasser authorized the first ever major exhibition of the treasures of Tut's tomb in Paris. And she was the curator. So this was a big thank you gift to Christiane from Nasser. So in 1967, this exhibit opened, and it was just a smash hit. People were lined up for blocks every day. It was just hugely popular. And so Tut mania took over in the world. Every country wanted Tut after that. Went first to the Soviet Union and to London. And then the US got it in 76 and kept it for 3 years. For people who were alive back then, I remember, it was just, people were just crazy over it. You couldn't get into it. It visited 6 cities, including the Met in New York. The first day it opened in New York, people were lined up for 23 blocks on a December day to get in. It started this whole Tut craze that continues to this day.
Well, I know we talked a lot, but the more I think about it, we've pretty much still only covered about 30% of the book. I mean, we haven't even touched on how cutthroat apparently museums are with each other, but that's all in there. Everybody can read that. What I always like to ask, the reason we started History Nerds United is because a lot of people think of history as boring. They're like, that's a class I took in school. It bored the heck out of me. Why would I read a history book now? If you had one of those people sitting in front of you right now and they said, why should I read Empress of the Nile, what would you say?
Okay, well, first of all, I would say I know what you're talking about, because when I took history in grade school and high school, I thought it was the most boring subject. I hated it. I had no idea that I would ever be a historian. But I don't really think of history as history. I think of it as his story. It's stories about people. People always like to learn about people. So read it, because this book is about people doing important, fascinating things. History is not figures. It's not dates. It's not names. It's what went on with people, what they were doing and why they were doing it, and their interactions with other people. And that makes history. So don't think of it as just this nebulous thing. It's people. That's what you focus on. It's people.
Lynn, thank you so much. This was an absolute thrill for me. And that is it for this episode. Lynn, thank you so much. Empress of the Nile, go out and buy it, nerds. It's fantastic. While you're waiting on that book to show up, listen to the podcast episodes, leave us reviews, 5 stars, please. Hit us up on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Send us emails on the blog. I'm cool with that. I'd love to talk with everybody. Come on, hit me up. Until next time, nerds, stay cool.